Hello, welcome to the last lecture of week 7. So, let us continue our discussions on the dynamics of nanomagnets, look at few applications of such kind of materials in real world and why these materials are becoming more and more important in today's scenario. You will find that you can make different configurations of such materials and you will get varied properties out of them. So, in today's lecture we will talk to you about the length time scales, the spin configurations and magnetization dynamics will continue from our SW model which was introduced in the previous lecture. We will talk about nanodots, antidots and nano ring type structures, so that you understand that you can get very interesting modulation in the properties as you go from one type of confinement to the other types of confinements in nanomaterials. We will also talk about binary and bicomponent magnetic nanostructures and then look at some of the interesting magnetic particles and their applications in emerging areas. So, if you look into the typical classifications we talk about in terms of size and the corresponding spin which we are talking about. So, you can see that you can have various types of structures, materials. For example, you can go from thin films to nanoparticles to single molecules to even atoms or single atom. So, typically the size or dimensionality which we are talking about lie in the range of 100 nanometers in case of thin films, 10 to 100 nanometers, or let us say if you want to be very specific about nanometers and 1 to 100 nanometers as nanoparticles, but we will classify let us say 1 to 10 nanometers as single molecules or slightly larger size molecular structures. And then if you go to the angstrom level, then you are talking about the atoms or single atom, and corresponding spins are having different orders. So, you can make different types of structures and then you have different dynamics which are associated with such structures, and we have seen the SW model in the previous lecture. So, you can refer to this to understand what are we talking about as we go from classical regime to nano regime and we talk about confinement effects. So, the dynamics itself changes and therefore, we tend to move towards elongated grain type structures, or we see that you have alignment in one of the preferred spin directions, and that leads to interesting modulation in the properties. So, you can have very ordered structures and well defined crystalline phase associated with such particles. So, if you look into the length scale and then see what are we talking about. So, if you talk about, let us say, spin configuration, which can alter the static as well the dynamic properties. Now, if you go to micron size magnetic disk, you can have magnetic vortex states with in plane spin configurations and out of plane cores. So, you are talking about various types of arrangements. As the size decreases, so you are talking about size reduction, you will find that the systems transform from quasi single domain to single domain structure. So, you are moving towards an elongated grain type structures, and you can then start talking about various types of interactions which are possible in such magnetic structures. Now, you can clearly see that if you have different regime, that is a time regime, 1 femtosecond, 10 femtosecond, 1 picosecond, 1 nanosecond, 10 nanosecond or 1 second. So, as you talk about different time regime, then it is different types of interactions which you are monitoring. So, if you are monitoring very fast dynamics, then you are talking about exchange interactions, and if you are talking about a time scale in the range of 1 seconds or so, then you are talking about domain wall motion. So, you are talking about a large size particles and how the grains within them are interacting or getting modulated. So, you have time scale and the corresponding types of interactions which dominate in different time scales which you are monitoring. So, you can find out what would be the nature of properties you would be monitoring in different regimes. So, based on the characteristic time scales, you can have various types of magnetization dynamics. So, if you are talking about exchange interactions, which is a very fast process, it occurs within 10 femtoseconds. So, it is a very fast dynamics. If you are talking about spin orbit coupling, then it is on the femtosecond time scales, but it is also occurring at a very fast pace. If you are talking about ultra fast laser induced demagnetization, it occurs in the range of, let us say, sub 100 femtoseconds to sub picosecond range. Now, you can have magnetizations which are fast remagnetization processes, they occur over few picoseconds. And if you start talking about slow remagnetization, precision, damping or spin wall or spin wave dynamics, then you are talking about a range which spans hundreds of picoseconds and to nanoseconds, and much slower dynamics, then you are talking about vortex core gyration, core switching, which can go to several nanosecond time scale, or you can start understanding domain wall motions, and that would extend to few nanoseconds, or you can even go to micro second time scales. So, based on the time scales in which this process or these processes occur, you have various classifications of the magnetization dynamics. For example, if you look into the dynamics of 2D arrays of nanostructure. For example, if you study the dynamics of 2D arrays of nanostructures. So, now you have thin films and you can have both connected and disconnected structures, which can be called as nanodots, antidots or their composites, which can enable very interesting properties, and they can be fabricated using various fabrication tools, and you can even scale up the production of these materials. Based on the structural features, such 2D arrays of nanostructures are classified as nanodot or antidot, nanoring, bicomponent or even as binary nanostructures. Now, if you look into magnetic dots, what are those? These nanodots are tiny patterned magnetic structures. So, they are patterned. So, they are being arranged in well defined order. That is the word patterned means, where they are in the nanometer range and the spins can organize into different stable or dynamic states. So, you can have dynamic states or they can have a very stable states associated with them. Because you have taken them to nanometric range, their properties are very different to the bulk magnets. As we have seen in the previous lecture, the origin lies in the SW model. So, as you go to very small sized pattern structures, the properties are going to be different. If you, for example, perform experiments like ferromagnetic resonance FMR or Brillouin light scattering measurements BLS measurements, then these particles can actually support different types of oscillation modes. They can be collective modes where all the spins move together, or they can be edge modes where spins near the boundary they behave differently. And you will find it is very interesting to see that edge effects are not only limited to such structures. In many applications, you will find that edge effects are very prominent. It is not only confined to magnetic nanostructures. You can go to polymeric structures, you can go to membranes, you can go to some kind of a long nanoparticle based structure where edge effects are very interesting. And if you are interested, you can read about edge effects in various systems, and you will find why these edge effects modulate the properties. But in this case, you can understand there are edge modes where the spins near the boundaries, that is at the edges, behave differently. Now, based on the size and geometry, such particles can form uniform states, vortex states or mixed modes. and because they are magnetic materials, their frequencies can be tuned by applying the external magnetic field. Now, as we have seen and we have been discussing that as you go from one morphology to the other, that is one particle, let us say, which has an elliptical type shape, then you go to a triangular type shape or a rectangular type shape particle or a spherical type shape particle, then the nature of confinement changes in these structures. And owing to that, what do you expect? That you will have different magnetic properties in these structures. So, will these measurements give you similar kind of inferences? Yes. So, if you compare the properties of, let us say, elliptical, diamond, triangular or rectangular type structures, which are given in the corresponding TM pictures, then each shape produces a different demagnetization factor, and hence they change the spin process in response to the applied magnetic field, and because there is a different path of demagnetization, the nature of this factor also is different in different types of particles. So, they will have different types of frequency versus magnetic field curves. So, you can clearly see the magnitudes and then you can see what is the nature we are talking about. Next particles are magnetic antidots. They are actually structures which are similar to pattern structures, but they are periodically perforated ferromagnetic thin films. So, you have perforated structures. Sometimes you also call them as porous structures. So, you have perforations, but you can see there is clearly well defined ordering, which we call as patterning. So, these structures can be configured as magnonic crystals, where unlike the isolated nanomagnet arrays, you do not have small or separate magnetic elements. Instead, what happens? The entire film is exchange coupled. So, what happens? Because there is strong interactions and exchange interactions at the boundaries, and in the middle there is no mass available where this exchange is taking place. So, it is at the boundary. So, a lot of predominant exchange coupling takes place. So, this leads to higher spin wave propagation velocity, longer propagation distance compared to isolated nanomagnets. But if you look into these structures, they are clearly connected magnetic network which avoid super paramagnetic limit that are associated with nanomagnets. So, you have a well connected magnetic structures. So, you can have the spin wave propagation taking place. Now comes another types of structures which are magnetic rings. These are structures which have high symmetry structures, where the magnetization circulates without forming a vortex core, unlike the disc like structures where vortex core was being formed. Now, what happens? Their magnetic normal modes are therefore simpler compared to disc, which makes them very attractive to study spin dynamics. Because of this circular direction in the rings, what happens? You can have the vertical magnetic random access memory cells. So, you can design new types of magnetic random access memory cells. Now, because of the ring like structures, you can have two types of magnetic states, either vortex state, which is a flux closure type state, or you can have onion state where spins align in opposite direction in the two halves. So, you have two halves and the spins align in the opposite directions in each half of the ring. Then you can have bicomponent magnetic nanostructures. These are again designed artificial systems which consists of two different magnetic materials arranged together. Typically, they include dots and discs embedded in a magnetic matrix. Now, you have these kind of structure embedded in a magnetic matrix. So, what you can do? Now, you can tune the properties of both materials as well as in these dots and discs, and hence you can tune the magnonic band structures also. And one of these structures which were investigated quite initially was where the iron cylindrical shaped particles were embedded in a EOO matrix showing a magnonic band gap. Now, this band gap is basically a forbidden frequency range for spin wave propagation in the periodic magnetic structures, which is very similar to what we talk about electronic band gaps which occurs in semiconductors, or photonic band gaps which occur in photonic crystals. So, you can also have certain frequencies where you will not get any signal, and these are called as the MBG, the magnonic band gap structures. So, you can have altogether new type of materials just by changing the shape and size of the materials. If you look into the major breakthroughs which are reported now or which were reported way back in late 2000s or early 2010s or so, you will find if you take a 1D bicomponent strips of, let us say, CuO and Py, then it actually gave size tunable band gaps, MBGs. So, you can change the size and you were getting the tunable MBGs. Very similar to what you were getting in electronic semiconductors, and you were getting band gaps, but just by changing the size of the particles, you could get similar structures and similar response characteristics by changing the size of the cobalt nanodiscs. This was basically happening because of the periodic arrangements of the magnetic structures and the exchange interactions which take place. So, you can use these material and then make their usage possible in applications such as one directional nano grating couplers or omnidirectional nano grating couplers, which enhances the amplitude of SWs and this amplitude enhancement is more than what you get in microwave antennas. You can also have binary magnetic nanostructures, as the name suggests, binary. So, you can have two types of magnetic structures which are either of same or of different materials, and then they are placed next to each other. And they are quite easy to fabricate because you can simply make them using single step methods. And by changing the arrangement, by changing the pairs which you are forming, you can change the properties by changing the direction of the applied magnetic field. And if you can do so, what is the thing which will change? That means immediately the magnonic band structure will change, and if that changes, there are all these associated properties which we have discussed before this slide will also get modulated, and then you can use these materials for other applications such as for controlling spin waves, and you can then use them for focusing or defocusing them at one point, just like what you can do with light in optics. Now, if you see the strong coupling between the nanodots, you see that this leads to new spin wave modes and unusual wave behaviors. And the consequence is that if you can make very carefully modulated structures, then you can narrow the spin wave spectrum and allow the conversion between different wave modes. Now, you can talk about various types of couplings and how this magnonic band structure is changing, and then you can clearly see that the wave modes would be different, and therefore, the response characteristics of magnetic structures would get modulated. For example, let us say you take an example which is a natural example like ferritin, where you have a nanopore. So, you have a porous structure in which a magnetic particle is confined. So, like a core shell structure. So, ferritin is a natural example where a spherical protein shell, it actually stores iron in living organisms. So, now this shell has an inner diameter of approximately 7.5 nanometers and an outer diameter of 12.5 nanometers. So, you can see that such structures occur naturally also. Now, if the size of ferritin shell changes, will the property remain same or will it get modified? So, the protein will start behaving in different nature as the shell diameter changes. So, in biological systems you will find that lysosome, here the ferritin stores iron 3 plus ions, and you will find that 25% of human body's iron is stored in ferritin, while 70% is stored in hemoglobin. Now, what happens? This cavity which you are seeing here is usually filled with Fe2O3 with 9H2O, water of crystallization. This contains few to several thousands of iron atoms per molecules. Now, what does ferritin do? It maintains the balance of iron storage and the release in cells. This prevents deficiency or overload. Hence, ferritin does what? It acts as safe iron storage system while protecting the cells from iron mediated oxidative damage. So, you have naturally occurring structures which are extensively present and they are in the nano dimensions, and their dynamics are very different if their sizes are modulated. So, what will happen? The magnetic properties of such ferritin will depend on what? Will depend on the number and type of magnetic particle inside the cavity, which will either give you ferro or anti-ferromagnetic behavior. And you will then associate the blocking temperature in such systems, and the blocking temperature actually decreases as the number of iron atoms is reduced. And if you take these particles to very low temperatures, then even at very low or nearly zero magnetic field, ferritin type structures show quantum tunneling, and you have a modified response characteristics. Another structures are routinely fabricated, they are called as zeolites. Like they are synthetic crystalline structures with these kind of morphologies, and you can see the cavity can host the magnetic nanoparticles. If you change the size of the cavity, the confinement and the number of magnetic particles which can be infused in these cavities would be different, and therefore, the properties are going to be different. So, now you can either have naturally occurring structures, or you can have synthetically made structures where the magnetic response can be modulated easily. So, I hope you have clearly understood the high end applications of magnetic nanoparticles. Till the previous lecture, we were talking about the basics of nanoparticles, but it is also important to understand the present and future applications of the knowledge which we are gathering. So, today's lecture, in this we have given you a non-trivial applications and futuristic applications of magnetic nanoparticles, and you can find that as you make tailored nanostructures, you can open new avenues for such magnetic structures, and you can start talking about areas such as magnonics, spintronics, or bio-inspired nanomagnetism. And we have also shown today that you can have naturally occurring structures which give you such kind of response characteristics, or you can also synthesize these structures in the lab and mimic the properties, and you can then extend their applications to unconventional and newer areas. These are some of the references from where you can read even more about the topics which we discussed today. So, with this we come to the end of the lectures of week 7, and in week 8 we will continue with our discussions on magnetism, but we will start seeing some newer phenomena which were observed in magnetic nanostructures, phenomena like GMR, giant magnetoresistance, CMR, colossal magnetoresistance, and how these phenomena have impacted our lives. These would be discussed in the lectures to be covered in week 8. So, I thank you for attending today's lecture.